Welcome to episode 6 of the Pipeline Online Podcast. In this episode, we are speaking with Andrew Scheer, one of the leading members of Pierre Poilievre's Conservative team. Regina Coppell MP has been a previous leader of the Conservative Party, as well as Speaker of the House. We're going to be talking about energy policy, the trade war, getting pipelines finally built, bringing investment back to the oil patch, clean electricity regulations, and a whole lot more. Hi, welcome to episode 6 of the Pipeline Online Podcast. We've got Andrew Scheer on. We've only gone for about half an hour or so we're going to go through this pretty quick. Andrew Scheer is running in his 8th election now. He's a former speaker, former leader of the Conservative Party. He seems to be Pierre Poilievre's right-hand man. And today, just an hour ago, Mr. Poilievre was in St. John announcing their energy policy. So it's a perfect day to get Mr. Scheer online here. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for inviting me on the show, and I'm excited to talk about the Conservative vision for energy and support for our energy workers.
So the big announcement today was Mr. Poilievre announcing a national energy corridor, and I think you have a little bit of history about this. So can you tell us, is this the big energy policy for this campaign, and can you describe what is meant by this energy corridor?
Sure. Well, it certainly is a signature part of our energy platform. And basically, over the last 10 years, we've seen the Liberal government add so much red tape and so many regulations that there's a real lack of confidence in investments in energy in Canada. That's not an accident, by the way. That was what the Liberals desired. They have this agenda to make it so difficult to keep moving goalposts and targets. They want to make it so difficult for big energy projects to get built because of the radical and extremist agenda. So what we're announcing today is to restore that confidence, to entice private sector investment in energy projects and pipeline and distributions, and to encourage more exploration and drilling. What Pierre announced today is the vision of that national energy corridor. So where the federal government won't do what the Liberals have done, which is use taxpayer money to underwrite some of these projects. Go back to what it used to be in Canada, where private sector interests, private sector investors would fund these projects, but the government can get all that red tape out of the way and do all the planning and approvals and consultations up front, so that there's a defined space in Canada where there will have already been consultations with First Nations community, geological and aquifer studies to make sure that a proposed path would be the right place to build it. All the environmental considerations, so that the companies, when they can see a clear path to an approval, will come back and do what they used to do before the Liberals were elected, and that's invest in our energy sector.
So, Andrew, it's lovely to have you, by the way. On the energy corridor, one thinks of, well, a couple things. I mean, one being that the federal Liberals used the peace, order, and good government argument on the carbon tax challenge. So basically, a constitutional hammer which came down to drive their agenda forward from the carbon tax perspective. Premier Eby, you'll know this sort of intriguing Bill 7 kind of floating below the radar about, streamlining environmental approvals, infrastructure approvals for important projects in BC. He's had to walk some of that back on partly because of the Indigenous duty to consult side. I guess, both of which lead to the question, is the energy corridor going to have to be got through, if you like, as an energy emergency of sorts, an economic emergency of sorts, in response to, not only the tariff threat, but really to just begin to streamline projects in Canada in a similar vein, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would definitely say that there is a crisis in Canada's energy sector, and it is all government made. And this is what, I travel around southeastern Saskatchewan, all over Alberta, and in the prairie provinces, we are used to cycles. We're used to commodity cycles, and we're used to natural disasters. Whether it's agriculture or natural resources. You can have weather, be a big wild card. So where I'm going with this is that our energy sector workers are very resilient. They understand that there can be market forces that lead to cycles in the industry. But when the world wants what we have, when there's a massive demand for Canadian clean and ethical natural gas, oil, conventional energies, and we have a government that's blocking it, that's where the real anger and frustration comes from. So, when I look at the numbers, $176 billion in lost investments in Canada's energy sector, a continued dependence on the US as a market, lots and lots of job losses. And, for those of us who have friends and family in the energy sector, especially in southeastern Saskatchewan, a few years ago, the insult to injury, what really stung was watching American drilling and exploration companies coming up to Canada, buying heavy equipment at pennies on the dollar at auctions, just to be moved across a line to be used in many cases in the exact same reserves that exist in Canada, being developed in the US, but not in Canada. So that sense that it's the government that's the problem is I think, driving a lot of frustration. And there is absolutely an urgent need to get these built. So what Pierre has announced today is that the federal government, under a Conservative government, would undo all the damage of the Liberal government. Repeal Bill C-69, and we can get into that too. Repeal the carbon tax on the industrial emitter side, but then let the energy sector, let the companies that traditionally have employed so many people in Canada, let them see a sign that there will be a government that champions Western Canadian oil and gas, that will be there as a partner, not with taxpayers' money, but with clearing those roadblocks and those hurdles. And everyone I talk to in the energy sector, from the big companies, the billion-dollar companies, to literally the family-operated service sector companies type of thing, nobody's looking for the federal government to use tax dollars here. That was something that only happened under the Liberal government after they chased away the private sector investment. But what they do want to see is, okay, if you tell me the goalpost is there, and you tell me I have to kick the ball so many yards to get through that goalpost, just don't move it on me. Just don't move it side to side and back and forth. And so what this announcement is, it's about locking in place those targets, those hurdles that proponents will have to comply with. And then the government leading the way on things like the environmental assessments, the consultations with First Nations community, so that we can do that and then literally roll out a map and show the investment community, if you want, you can build something, whether it's a transmission line or whether it's a pipeline or what have you, you can do it in this corridor because we've done all the homework on you. We've prepared the way.
So one of the things that a lot of people may not realize, that this energy corridor de facto exists already in good portion of Western Canada, like from Regina to the Manitoba-Ontario border. That corridor pretty much is there because the Trans-Canada pipeline parallels the Trans-Canada pipe or CPR main line and the Trans-Canada highway. And I believe that extends through a good chunk of Northern Ontario. The problem is, and has always been a problem, how are you, a Conservative government, going to get through Quebec?
Well, look, I mean, there's a lot of support in Quebec for using Canadian energy instead of importing it from other countries. And when we were proposing, when I talk to people in Quebec, when our leader travels through Quebec, at the grassroots level, there is a strong desire from individual Quebecers to stop importing foreign oil. When people find out that the vast majority of oil that's being used in Eastern refineries come from other countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Algeria, or in many cases even the United States, that offends their sense of national pride. And to think that we've got a country that has to sell energy at a discount because of the inability to transport across provincial lines. When people hear that and understand it, they are very much on side with what we're proposing. So we're confident.
The Trump trade war has really put a fire under this. I mean, I've heard more people talk about pipelines in the last 3 months than I have in the last 6 years. And, they wanted to reinvigorate projects that have been defunct for 8 years now or more.
Exactly. I don't need to tell you, Northern Gateway would have opened up deep water access to Asian markets. That pipeline was vetoed by the federal Liberals. Energy East, of course, would have brought Western Canadian energy into Eastern Canadian refineries. The Liberals stacked on so many rules and regulations and made that project account for all kinds of upstream and downstream emissions that no other sector in the country had to, and effectively killed it. So, it's there's a little bit of a, I told you so feeling from conservatives in the 2019 and 2021 elections by saying, if you cancel these pipelines and let the Liberals get away with it, you're going to make us more dependent on the United States. So long before Donald Trump got elected and was making these threats, conservatives were saying we shouldn't have all our eggs in one basket. Anybody who's ever run a business knows that if you have one customer making up about 70% of your sales, you've got a problem. That relationship can go sideways. That customer can look for other markets. So every business that has one major client is always looking to diversify. Under the Liberals, we weren't. Not only were we not, we were saying no to our allies. And when I saw the Prime Minister of Japan in the Oval Office signing a deal with the United States, knowing that our allies were coming to Canada and asking for that same LNG that we can produce here, it just as a Canadian, it just stings because of all that lost jobs and opportunity. So what we're saying right now, Canadians have a choice. Mark Carney will continue all the same policies as Justin Trudeau. He wrote a book that described himself as a human being called Values. And he talks about leaving the oil and gas in the ground, complaining that the carbon tax is too low. He is on the most extreme end of energy policies that we saw under Justin Trudeau. Nothing will change if he gets if the Liberals get a fourth term. So conservatives, we support our energy sector. We support our workers. We believe that Canada should be proud of it and export more of it. We don't do the world any favors when we kill jobs and investments here just to see that production go to countries like China, where they emit at far higher levels than Canada. And we're excited about this national corridor idea because it will restore that confidence and get lots of men and women working again back, whether it's manufacturing the heavy equipment, whether it's the fabrication of the steel, whether it's laying it in the ground, or whether it's refinery jobs in Eastern Canada. It's a win-win-win project that really pulls our country together.
One of the things that we forget, and I'll never forget, Andrew, your stance a couple elections ago about the clean fuel standard. You were, very explicit about how it was carbon tax number 2. Brian always teases me about my referencing it that way every time I bring it up. The point is that when we're talking about tariffs, when we're talking about energy independence and security and the rest, pipelines are one part of it, corridor absolutely, but it is those underpinning policies that Carney has really said nothing about, that will presumably remain in place. And there is an amazingly long list of them, from Bill C-69 to Clean Fuel Standard to the EV regs to the clean electricity regulations to the greenwashing bill, and on it goes. And how quickly we all forget, and I hope Canadians don't, and I think a lot of our listeners don't, about the patchwork really that is part of the broader whole, which really is the tariff discussion, because it's about strength and rebuilding and protecting strength.
Well, exactly. And when you look at the $175 billion in investments that left Canada under the Liberals, had we had a pro-growth, pro-energy government that was proud of our natural resource sector, that'd be $175 billion more dollars invested in our economy. So when we're dealing with these threats from the US, every nickel, every dollar of foreign investment into Canada strengthens us. It gives us two things. One, it gives us economic activity that is not at risk when the US puts these tariffs on. If we have other customers in other countries, that's helpful. Secondly, it gives us leverage at the bargaining table, because if we have all different global investors fighting to get their investments into Canada, including American investors, that money coming from the US to develop resources here in Canada, then we have allies in the United States that will help us fight against these tariffs from the administration. When you chase those jobs and investments away, you just don't have those allies. You don't have those diversified markets to sell to. So we are entering into this tariff threat in a vulnerable position because of Liberal policies. And it's not just because Justin Trudeau's a buffoon. It's not just because he has, he's bad at his job. It was that, but also he believes in policies that Mark Carney shares. And that's, I think, the most important thing for your viewers and listeners to take away from this and to spread the word. Mark Carney does not represent change. He believes in all those same beliefs and policies that Justin Trudeau imposed on our energy sector, and all of that will continue. As recently as a few weeks ago, he was talking about leaving the oil and gas in the ground, calling them stranded assets. He's made a ton of money in the private sector for himself and his rich friends by lobbying governments to bring in these rules and regulations like the carbon tax 2.0 on the fuel standards. And then he goes and invests in companies that supply alternatives to that. So he's been very upfront about how he's been making his money. The problem is those policies have cost Canadians dearly, cost us billions of dollars, lots of job losses. So, what Conservatives are saying in this election is let's put an end to the lack of common sense. When we see coal-fired power plants coming online in China, I think it's at the rate of like one a week or something like that. It's a crazy pace of how many new coal production power plants they're building. It begs the question: we're imposing such poverty on Canadians by increased costs and lost economic activity. We actually end up with more CO2 emissions in the world. So we're further behind. There's more CO2 in the atmosphere. Nobody wins in that way. But the Conservative plan of developing our domestic natural resources puts us in a stronger position to deal with Trump and increases economic activity and is actually better for the environment.
Okay, so I wanted to get into the Trump thing here that you're talking about. How does oil and gas and electricity fit into this Trump trade war? I mean, the biggest stick that we have is to go to Gretna, Manitoba and shut off the taps. And if they do, I have fear that Trump may push us into not just a recession, but a depression. And possibly a liberal government or any government could choose to say, okay, we're going to hit them the hardest we can. We're going to turn off the Enbridge main line. And then the next day, Danielle Smith will call a referendum and Alberta will walk. And I mean, I hear it a lot that there's a lot of people in Alberta saying, okay, we're done. If the Liberals get reelected, it's time for Alberta to leave. What does this election mean for national unity and these pipelines? If anyone does turn off that pipeline, are we going to have a country the next week?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to get too into the weeds as to potential responses to threats, because it evolves on it somewhat. Some days it's evolving on an hourly basis. What I can tell you is that the Liberals have this track record of dividing Canadians, of pitting one region against the other, and this is a track record for Justin Trudeau. Before he took office, the national unity sentiments were very high. The Bloc Québécois was very low in the polls. It had only had a handful of seats. Since over the past few years of Liberal policies, we've seen the Bloc gain a lot of support in Quebec, and of course the sentiment of alienation in Western Canada is very strong when you see a government really targeting an industry and a way of life for people in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where it's obvious it's very unfair. It's very unfair the way the federal government has picked on industries that are so important to our two provinces, that employ so many people. But the good news is that the Conservatives have the answer. We can, and just talking about national unity for a second too. The Liberals over the last few years were talking down our country. They were really acting like they were embarrassed of Canada as a history, as a nation with our history. They were removing national symbols, removing statues of founders of Confederation, and it was Conservatives that were maintaining our sense of national pride and celebrating what it means to be Canadian. When a Conservative government is in office, we treat all regions fairly. We support all our industries. We support oil and gas in Alberta, Saskatchewan. We support fisheries in Atlantic Canada. We support manufacturing in Ontario, forestry in BC. The list goes on, because we recognize that there's no, that we have to support all sectors that produce so much prosperity for Canadians, and that's what we understand, is that when the oil and gas sector is booming, it's not just good for Alberta and Saskatchewan. I've done tours of facilities all over Western Canada, and I asked them, where's this piece of machinery from? And they'll say, oh, that's from Ontario, or oh, that was assembled. There's a company in Quebec that supplies this aspect of or this product and what we use. So there are jobs in Ontario and Quebec that are dependent on a vibrant energy sector. And so we have that message. I'm hopeful that Conservatives are going to win this election. We're going to end the practice of pitting one region against the other. And we won't have to have difficult conversations about national unity, because everyone will see in a government, in a Conservative government, a government that supports their way of life, their province, their region.
Speaking of provinces and supporting them and the rest, the industrial carbon tax, obviously, Mr. Poilievre has said that he would scrap it, and I guess in anticipation of that, Saskatchewan has said they would pause it. This of course is the famous backstop. We all know about it. Where the feds basically have the provinces over a barrelhead, and it's pay up or collect it, or we'll do it for you. And to get anything back, as you know, Andrew, the provinces have to go through all kinds of crazy contortions, and there are all sorts of strings attached on where that money goes. Even though it's our money, it's always presented as somehow a gift, whereas it's a re-gift and the rest. I guess just views on the industrial carbon tax, on the position that Saskatchewan took, and where we go from here.
Well, I should just point out that it was only the Conservative Party that supported the Saskatchewan government's fight on the jurisdictional aspects of the carbon tax. And when the Liberal government was threatening to throw provincial ministers in jail for not collecting it, it was only our party that stood on Saskatchewan's side. But you're right to bring up this topic as a big component. First of all, I think we all need to just acknowledge that whatever Mark Carney might be saying about the consumer carbon tax is completely phony. I mean, he's gone through this theatrical display and all on the eve of an election. He's fought for carbon taxes his whole life. When we were calling it a carbon tax, they were trying to call it a price on carbon, or a carbon price. And that was the terminology they used for years. And I remember debating on this. I said, when the government sets it, the government collects it, the government forces you to pay it, and you have no choice but to pay, that's a tax. You can call it whatever you like, but that is a tax. And they only switched their terminology on this on the eve of an election. So it is not a sincere position. But even if we look at just the industrial side, that still takes a huge sting out of our economy and leads to price increases. Mark Carney was asked about this, and he said, well, his plan was to create a shadow carbon tax, where he would move the consumer portion and stack that on top of the industrial side. So what he's saying is that you're still going to pay as much, you're just not going to see it directly. He's going to bury that line item on that carbon tax. Well, what does that mean? Well, he was specifically asked about how that would affect consumer prices, because all that gets passed on to the customer. And his very flippant answer to the journalist that was asking him said, well, it'll go on things like steel. And come on, how much steel have you bought recently? Well, as someone who just had to replace their dishwasher and microwave, there's steel that goes into appliances, there's steel that goes into cars, there's steel that goes into housing materials. So there's lots of ways that Canadians pay for steel, and that's just one commodity. There's going to be a higher industrial carbon tax on so many things. Now, let's bring this home to Saskatchewan. I represent a Regina riding. I've got Evraz Steel in my riding and a whole lot of steel workers that work there. And when you are imposing a carbon tax on Canadian steel production, when they have to compete with American plants just a few hundred kilometers away on the other side of the border, the federal Liberal government has put our steel manufacturers at an incredible disadvantage. I mean, even before the tariffs came into play, our Canadian producers were facing a massive gap between what they had to pay and what their competitors in the US had to pay. So scrapping the industrial carbon tax is something that only the Conservatives are willing to do. And again, it goes back to that idea of reducing global emissions. If we displace steel production here in Canada, only to see it produced in China, where they use much dirtier forms of electrical production, where they don't have the same environmental standards, they don't have the same labor rights, they don't have the same human rights, they don't have the same environmental protections across the board, we're not doing the planet any favors. We're actually creating a situation where there's higher levels of CO2, less investments in jobs in Canada. So that's a big piece. I think if anybody in Saskatchewan, Alberta, across the country, if you're watching this in any part of the country, all those manufacturing jobs on steel, aluminum, assembly, you name it, our Canadian companies under Mark Carney's plan will have to pay a carbon tax while our American competitors don't. That's like sending your hockey team out to play against another team and giving them those mini sticks to play with instead of real NHL sticks, or go compete with the Americans, but you're not allowed to wear skates. Like we're sending our Canadian companies into the marketplace at a massive disadvantage that the government itself has imposed on. It's just madness.
So you actually touched on a few things here when you talked about China and coal and the carbon tax. This is all related. There's one other thing I want to get to before we run out of time, and this is related to the carbon tax. It's the clean electricity regulations, which in their original form, until they were kind of watered down, was to get rid of all fossil fuel power generation in Canada. Now, in Saskatchewan, on any given day, it can be up to 88% natural gas and coal. And it turns out, I just found out at midnight today, that on Saturday, Saskatchewan's 817 megawatts of wind generation averaged 1 megawatt for 24 hours. So where does a Conservative government policy fit on the clean electricity regulations, which is part of the, we're going to tax to death what we don't want, and then we're going to legislate out the rest of it? Where do you fit on this? Because while the rest of Canada has largely got rid of coal power production, Saskatchewan, we haven't.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, our entire approach is geared towards incentives instead of punishments, and making life more affordable for Canadians. I mean, as we're talking about threats from the U.S. and what tariffs might do, and how Canadians and different jurisdictions react, this is all against the backdrop of a massive cost of living crisis brought on by Liberal government policy. So, utility bills is a big part of that. Obviously the carbon tax was a big culprit in raising those costs. What I can tell you, because we are in an election campaign and our leader will be making various announcements along the way to speak to these issues. What I can tell you is that everything we do, all the lenses that we look, the major lens that we'll look at policy decisions is, will this increase or lower costs for Canadians? And whether it's the industrial carbon tax, whether it's the consumer carbon tax, whether it's the fuel regulations, Liberal policies have done one thing and one thing only, and that's driven up the cost of everything. And rather than working with provinces to incentivize efficiencies and reductions in emissions and other types of particulate matter, rather than using carrots, this government's been using sticks, and that's why costs have risen. So we're not going to do, we're going to have an environmental approach that factors in actual metrics. What are the capabilities on things like renewables, and what can we actually count on in terms of output? What can we do to produce electricity at lower levels of emissions, but do it through incentives that don't raise prices, don't raise those consumer costs. And I've heard from provincial representatives who estimate what your average SAS power bill would hit if the Liberals continue down this path, and it's pretty bleak.
I got to ask here before we go. The current laws on the books are that Saskatchewan must shut down its coal-fired conventional coal by 2030. The Saskatchewan government is now currently looking at rejuvenating its coal fleet and basically saying, to hell with you, the federal government, we're going to do what we please. Will a Conservative government allow continued conventional coal power generation in Saskatchewan past 2030?
Well, as I said, some of these very specific questions, because we are in an election campaign, I do have to leave for when formal announcements are made on policies. But what I can tell you is, in our announcement where we were announcing that we would get rid of the industrial carbon tax, we specifically referenced allowing provinces to have greater flexibility on how they hit targets and how they innovate. And Alberta and Saskatchewan may have one path to lower emissions that, because of our geography, our geology, and our climate and our location, will be different from what, say, Atlantic provinces are able to do. And using those incentives by having that lens of keeping prices down and making utilities more affordable, that's the lens with which we view things, and incentivizing rather than punishing. That's the general approach of what Conservatives will be doing.
And it's the constitutionally correct approach, right, Andrew? I mean, Constitution is very clear. Provinces have the the right over power generation and extraction of natural resources, and it really restores to them the flexibility that was envisioned originally. My last question. I know you have to go. In terms of just getting the broader message out, and I'm I'm going to show my hand a little bit on this one. I do find it frustrating to see how, if you watch the scrums, including by Mr. Poilievre on live news channels in the morning, you get a very fulsome idea of where he's coming from, of where all the leaders are coming from. Fair enough. But by the evening, I find that his messaging has been, kind of clipped and culled, as it goes through the hopper of the day. And I guess my question is, how do you guys continue to get your message across in a, in a detailed, nuanced way? Because the policies that are being put forward are such on energy, for example, right? So just, how do you address that challenge, I guess, of the cycle and of getting your message out?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. The Parliamentary Press Gallery just is doing an abysmal job of actually letting Pierre get his message out. And when I look at some of the issues that the Carney campaign has had, downplayed by the mainstream traditional media, it's incredibly frustrating, because I know what would have happened if the shoe was on the other foot, if there was a conservative leader that had a similar challenge. So I'll give you an example. Mark Carney was caught accused of plagiarism in his university paper. There's only one outlet in Canada that covered that. There was more outlets in the UK that covered it than in Canada. Pierre will give a speech highlighting, National Energy Corridor is a great example, and his explanation and his vision for the country on this can be cut down to like 8 seconds. And meanwhile, the media focus on process stories like polling and things like that. So it is frustrating, but that's why Conservatives have really taken to innovative ways of communication, doing things like this podcast. We're all shooting videos where we're trying to explain conservative philosophies and conservative principles. I've got a number of videos out explaining everything from how government spending and money printing causes inflation to Trudeau's attack on free speech and everything in between. So we're finding ways to get our message out. It is extremely frustrating, but I just hope that the bottom line is I hope no matter what Canadians see on TV, no matter what they might see on the news that day, that they understand one thing: Mark Carney will do the exact same things as Justin Trudeau did. Justin Trudeau was not unpopular because he was a bad dinner guest or because he ran over your dog. He was unpopular because his policies caused so much hardship. He caused the cost of living crisis, drove up prices, unleashed crime and chaos in our streets with weakened penalties for dangerous and repeat offenders. That's why life in Canada was so difficult for the past 10 years. Nothing changes with Mark Carney. The only way to get real change is to vote for Pierre Poilievre and the common sense Conservatives.
I gotta say, the videos you've put out are some of the best I've seen in the political space in Canada for explaining stuff like that. I mean,
thank you.
Compared to your earlier days, you've really polished that thing. I understand you do have to go pretty soon. You're getting hooked here. If there's anything you want to sum up, Mr. Scheer, and we'd love to have you on again in the future. Folks, before he goes here, we will stay on for another half hour. So we've got some comments we'd like to maybe bring up and discuss. And if you have any other things you'd like to discuss about what's going on here, Mr. Scheer, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, this is a great discussion. I just hope your viewers and listeners just understand that the Conservative Party is a champion for this. We've got to break the narrative that somehow energy development in Canada is a bad thing, not a good thing. I mean, it pays for the schools, it pays for the hospitals, it provides so much revenue for the provincial government to provide support services. When I go door knocking in Regina, and I hear concerns from people that require support from government, I tell them, okay, the money that will pay for that program, the funds that will pay for housing, or affordable housing, or for social programs for disabled people, you name it, all have to come from somewhere. And the energy sector in Canada provides such a bonanza of revenue for federal and provincial governments that traditionally have been shared. That yes, the workers get paid for the work, and the companies obviously have a return for their shareholders. But boy, the provincial government benefits a lot. There's a lot of nurses' salaries and doctors' salaries and medical equipment that get paid for out of those royalties and revenue. So that message that it's good for everyone, it's something we should be proud of. We should have a government that celebrates it, that's a champion for that sector, not a government that's embarrassed by it, that tries to hamper it. And most importantly, with the Conservative government, when our allies and our trading partners come to us asking to buy our LNG, our oil and gas, we will say yes. We'll end the practice of the Liberals telling them no, saying there's no business case. So I hope that message resonates with your viewers, and I hope everyone who's watching can spread the word on that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Scheer, and we'll talk to you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. So we've got Bronwyn and I here are going to be around for another half hour or so. I'm just going to go to an ad for a second, folks. If you have any comments about the discussion we just have, we can interact with you there. If you want to ask some questions or make some comments about what you heard. The announcement that was made today, as Bronwyn mentioned, it usually gets filtered out. Not on Pipeline Online. I will be posting verbatim Mr. Poilievre's speech, which is his big energy speech for this campaign. That will be available here tomorrow morning. I'll have it online for Pipeline Online. So we're just going to go to an ad here, and I'll be back in a minute. There's a reason that HG Jack has dominated Saskatchewan's oil patch. That's because that distinctive curved walking beam reduces energy consumption by about 25%. That means 25% less power bills, 25% less carbon tax. That's a big difference. And it's available exclusively from Grimes Sales and Service, Batman, Saskatchewan. And we're back. Bronwyn, what do you think about that? The timing is like, wow. Pierre puts this thing out at 10 o'clock or this morning, and here we've got his number two talking about it on the Pipeline Online podcast.
It's excellent. I'm really thrilled we could have him, and raised a lot of interesting points. Hey, Brian, I mean, do you want to go in order back from the top, the energy corridor thing, and just chat it out, see what comments we've canvassed and so on?
Yeah. Okay. So regarding the energy corridor, you see the image in the background here. That is the Line 3 replacement. That's a big inch pipeline project, just like I used to work on when I was young and skinny. What he's really talking about is the ability to do this sort of work, not just here in Western Canada, where it's been generally easy, but through Quebec. And I mean, I asked him about that. He didn't really answer the whole, how do we get through Quebec thing, other than just going to make it happen. What was your interpretation on that?
Well, I mean, he is right that at the grassroots, Quebecers, have increased in terms of their support of pipelines and the concept of importing from Western Canada. I know a few years ago, I would cite I think it was around 50%, said that they would prefer Western Canadian oil, for example, over importing from Venezuela and the like. You think, geez, only 50. But there was a recent poll that has also been cited in the last few weeks. I think it's up to 70 something. I think that'll be partly because, well, it will be, I'm sure, because of the, of the tariff, territorial nature of the tariff discussion, and so it should be, and that's a positive thing. I think Quebec is one thing, and certainly we know what Legault has said about Western Canadian oil, which is that it's dirty and he doesn't want to import it, so that's not helpful. And politically, there's great touchiness about the pipelines thing in Quebec. I mean, they won't stand near a pipeline, even though they have lots of them and the rest. So there is that factor to deal with. But the bigger issue around an energy corridor is the Indigenous one, or at least it's as significant, which is the duty to consult. I mean, even barring, let's say, the Poilievre Conservatives win, they scrap C-69, which of course has imposed massive uncertainty on all environmental impact assessments, and they get rid of the rest of the crazy patchwork, and they scrap the tax and the rest. If they put this energy corridor in, or they go down that road, it is going to be that consultation side of things, and it's easier said than done, I think, to say, well, we'll prepare the way and the rest will follow. That's going to be a challenge, and that is why I raised, where, for example, you have elements of UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in place now, incrementally has begun to become in place, where you have that free and prior informed consent on energy infrastructure and so on. So that's going to be something you will have to encounter and deal with, and not without certainly a time-consuming aspect. And as I said, that's why I mentioned to him Premier Eby's intriguing Bill 7, which was, power ahead, streamline regulation, cut red tape, turbocharge. But he walked back a part of it on Friday because of that Indigenous consultation component. As we all know, President Trump declared an energy emergency, and that's why I was asking Andrew, is that how you will get through something like an energy corridor? Because you almost have to go down that road, the sort of peace, order, and good government road, and instead of using peace, order, and good government as the federal Liberals did for the carbon tax, use it for pipelines. And I've said that for years, but it's not without twists and turns.
Well, the image I put up here, so for instance, you're talking about not wanting to stand beside a pipeline. Here we see the pipes strung out for the Line 3 replacement. How many pipelines do you think you see in that picture? There's 6.
Wow.
If you look at where those bales are in the top right, there's 5 other pipelines. It's either on that side or the other side. I think it's on one or the other. That's the Enbridge main line. And once you cover it up and you put it all back, you just grow crops on it. It's not
for sure,
not even noticeable.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing that I've been talking to people about, making this happen. And the reality is, and I wish we had more time to talk to Andrew about this, is you need to make it happen now, like on a war footing, like get it done within one term. Now, people might say, oh my God, how could we do that? It took 4 years to build Trans Mountain. Well, as I've noted before, the original Trans Mountain was built with equipment that hardly even had hydraulics, and it was built in 16 months. The original Enbridge mainline was IPL at the time. It was built in around 16 months. I mean, these things can happen if you do it. Now, the biggest things that, like you say, are the consultations of First Nations and stuff like that. I mean, I think they trampled on a lot of stuff there. But if this energy corridor actually is successful, if they can get First Nations on board, and maybe what they have to do is say, okay, yes, we want to cross your land or your traditional territories, but you're going to get 2%, period. You're going to be a revenue partner from day one.
That's why it has to be much more streamlined. I mean, I think Andrew rightfully talks about harnessing the private sector and how the Liberals have done the opposite. They've unharnessed the private sector and reharnessed the government in terms of these projects. And I think that private companies are very wary as a result of the climate that's been created over the 10 years of dusting off all these plans. I mean, think of the Ring of Fire, and we're going to have the minister from Ontario on in a few weeks to talk about that one. I mean, there's another example of, okay, we're going to do it this time. We're going to get this done. And we've all seen that movie before. It's very difficult, to lay the groundwork where there can be uncertainty down the road. And it's really about guaranteeing that groundwork, no pun intended, will be laid. I mean, Enbridge Line 3, we've talked about this before, the replacement project. There's an incredibly great example of why you don't need Bill C-69, as I've always said. I mean, Enbridge learned its lesson, first go rounds. It had to consult. It consulted with thousands of communities. It did its homework. It got her done. And it didn't need a Bill C-69 to tell it that, and to have it be, permitted by the federal government. So, it's doable. Of course, it has to happen. It absolutely has to happen. So I think the Conservatives are saying we'll make it happen, and we'll make sure that those preparations are put down and in place. And if we can't go on like this, so it has to happen.
So let's look at some of the, so Jay Rydell here says we need to partner and create jobs for First Nations, create social programs. They would get involved. And he talks about Kitimat, First Nations working there. Douglas Thompson says duty to consult is sensible. However, it is not duty to be held hostage. And I think Northern Gateway was absolutely, and TMX were projects being held hostage by a First Nation, by certain First Nations. Coastal GasLink in particular, hereditary chiefs.
Yeah.
The elected chiefs said, go for it. Hereditary chiefs, nope, no can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A couple other comments we had here. Anyone else, if you want to comment, we got a few more minutes here yet. Let's see here.
What else did we talk about? The industrial carbon tax?
Yeah, the industrial carbon tax. So it really, and I mean, you know this more than anything because you fought this battle tooth and nail, is that the reality is the Liberal government did more than just legalize marijuana. They really focused their entire efforts not on building the economy, but on the whole climate change thing. So we're going to get rid of the coal power plants. We're going to carbon tax them until they die if they don't want to shut them down voluntarily. We're going to put the clean fuel standard, the second carbon tax you mentioned. Have the federal backstop is the output-based pricing system, also called performance standards, which is basically either we, the feds, are going to take the money, or you, the province, will take the money. But either way, we're going to tax it to death.
And we're going to put a lot of strings attached on what the money goes back towards. So it's kind of getting your own money back, but with for things you maybe might not have prioritized necessarily as a province. In some cases, maybe. But I mean, I know, for example, with nuclear, if you're going to go green, then, why couldn't we get all the money back at least to pour into the the SMR effort and so on. But it was always so tough to have those conversations. It was always very top down, very condescending, very greeny weeny, on the solar and wind and other sides of things. And here we are, and all that effort. And, we'll see what happens. I mean, as you've pointed out, Brian, I mean, it remains to be seen. I mean, clearly, if the Liberals, are successful, then that, Jonathan Wilkinson has already accused Premier Moe of being lawlessly like, President Trump and the rest. So they'll probably, bear down on that. And it's a very different outcome if Poilievre wins, because he says and has said he will scrap it. And, what he would replace it with, is so eminently reasonable. Let's build LNG facilities, which will bring emissions down. Let's let China do what it's doing in terms of opening steel mills and the rest, because carbon emissions go up 10-20% when you do that. I mean, just do reasonable things, put in place tax incentives and tech incentives to make things happen and roll, as opposed to this completely bottlenecked system, which is ideologically driven. It should have happened a long time ago.
So, a story I'm going to have out in the next few days, not sure when yet, because I might be talking to the minister about this. And I just got a response back from the government regarding the output-based pricing system and how it affects SAS Power. I mean, we're looking at basically 3/4 of that was SAS Power money, being charged on that, and the rest mostly being oil and gas. That's a huge impact. I did some calculations last night, which I have to fine tune, but basically the carbon tax made coal uneconomic in that for a unit, let's say 1,000 megawatts of power, if you produce a combined cycle natural gas or of coal, the amount of carbon tax you pay is double on coal because it has to double the GHG output. If you remove the output-based pricing system or performance standards, whatever they call it this week, then all of a sudden coal becomes much more economic. The reality is that if you look at SAS Power's annual reports for the last few years, you'll find that we spend $350 to $450 million a year on natural gas for the fuel. And almost all of that's going to Alberta, and that's money that does not come back, goes to Alberta oil companies. Mm-hmm. Whereas last year, we paid ourselves $25 million in royalties for our own coal that we burned in our own coal plants. So as the result of that, if you look at we call it @SK Electricity on Twitter, gentleman who we call it posts daily logs of SAS Power's output, you'll find that in recent months, compared to a year ago, about 2 years ago, coal and natural gas are basically 50-50 for output. And now it's 2-1 natural gas to coal. When we get rid of that, and that's largely due to this carbon tax, we get rid of that carbon tax, and all of a sudden the equation changes. And then if you look at what the AECO we call it pricing is expected to be, the futures contracts for the next 4 years, that price won't be $2 gigajoule, but $3.50 gigajoule.
Yeah, I mean,
So instead of spending $4.50, we might be looking at maybe up to $1 billion a year in natural gas.
unleash us, please, finally. I mean, this is just crazy. And I mean, this thing about, well, Carney did the consumer tax, that's done and dusted. Then this narrative that sort of floated out there that that's now resolved. I mean, that is just incredible to me. I mean, the fact is that the carbon tax legislation remains on the books. The tax is scheduled to rise by up to 300% over the next 5 years, and Carney has been suspiciously vague, as Andrew pointed out, about what he's going to replace it with and how. I mean, of course, that and all the other policies are going to remain in place. If this happens, it is it's such a disaster. What I will just say this, and that's why I asked Andrew about getting the message out and that challenge, and it is a challenge. It is a challenge, and they have had to become very creative with videos to get around that problem. And you noted it in terms of Andrew's videos. I mean, certainly Poilievre, the Apple video, and the rest. I mean, he's been very successful with them. But the point is, the root cause was that he had to get the message out. This sudden talk about how somehow he isn't pivoting to the tariff issue by Corey tonight and others is astounding to me. I mean, the point is energy security, energy strength, economic strength are the pivots. They are the only pivots. And short of sending in a regiment or 2 or 500, I don't really quite know what that pivot could be, because we know, for example, when Premier Ford went down to the US, guns blazing, he said, he's going to turn the lights off to the Great Lakes states. And he had to pull his horns back so fast, it made everyone's head spin. It was within 24 hours, he was apologizing because Trump said, listen, if you do that, we're going to unleash hell on you. Very underreported fact.
Well,
so I just think this is, it's silly talk.
So Stacey brings up here, and I kind of tried to get into this earlier with Andrew, is what happens if the Liberals get in? What's Saskatchewan's next step? Because I really do think that didn't last week Danielle Smith basically throw down a gauntlet saying, if these things aren't addressed, we're going to have a national unity issue. Like when they say national unity issue, this is not Quebec going, we want more equalization. This is the people on the other end of a checkbook saying, we're gone. You don't get any more checkbooks. Equalization falls apart. The country falls apart. We will leave. And if Trump likes us, I don't know, we just went to his golf course a few months ago, maybe we'll go join them. I mean, she's not saying that expressly, but there's a lot of people in Alberta who are, and there's a lot of people in Saskatchewan. I went to a party last week. It was a Bye Trudeau party hosted in Weyburn. And, I talked to some people who said they would very happily become American citizens and join the United States. These are Saskatchewan people through and through, and they would very happily leave. What do we do here? What's Saskatchewan's next step?
Well, I'd be careful what you wish for in that regard. I think that's not without its own set of challenges, understatement, and would be. I think, though, definitely if the Liberals are successful, the let's call it Buffalo narrative, and I don't mean the party, I mean the original plan, if you like, for Alberta and Saskatchewan, for example, to have been a mighty one province, for example, that notion. I think you'll definitely see people dusting that off, because together we would be formidable, and we have been so ill-served by what should be cooperative federalism. I don't think we love our country less, but it is the sense of betrayal and the sense of just fundamental injustice. And as Andrew said, that we've had to experience certainly the last 10 years, but also through Trudeau Papa, as we know. And as Andrew said, this is the tragic thing. The division that has been wrought, internal division, the self-harm of the Federation, one part to another, east to west, projects approved in the Maritimes, carbon tax forgiven in the Maritimes, not here. I mean, nothing against the Maritimers. We all love each other, right? But this terrible, and just on the canola farmers. I mean, who could be so cruel as to not, as a PM, speak out for them? What have they done? How is they're wonderful contributors, as are the pea farmers and the rest, as are the fishermen in the Maritimes. They are amazing economic drivers and contributors to our economy, and they don't warrant a kind word.
Well,
that is astounding to me.
I'm glad you brought up the canola issue, because it is a big deal. I talked to some canola farmers, or to some farmers, who are now looking at dramatically dropping their canola production because of that tariff. Now, for those who don't have any background in farming, I grew up on a farm, but I'm 25 years removed from the tractor. The reality is that there's a reason why 1/3 of Saskatchewan crops are yellow in July. And that is because you can only grow canola every third year. Otherwise, you can get diseases. Otherwise, people grow it a lot more. Canola is the money maker. The other crops, the wheat, the barley, those are basically space fillers. They're like a zero in mathematics. It's canola where you make the money. And when you punish that, it's going to hurt. I mean, right now they're heavy into construction of the second expansion of a canola crusher plant in Yorkton. So the we call it James Richardson International doubled their capacity, and right now, right next to it, Louis Dreyfus is doubling their capacity. My mother is the closest neighbor. She can count, I think, 13 cranes over the fence building this thing. They may build it and complete it and not have a market for the product. That's a $250 million or so investment, adding on to another $250 million investment, and the other $500 million down the road.
And they saw it coming. Did they not see it coming? I mean, it's happened before in terms of the canola space. And I mean, the Fed saw it coming. Could have seen it, should have seen it, could have worked with our ag sector to anticipate what might happen. I mean, we are being held to ransom. Those farmers are being held to ransom by EV policies. And that is such an inconvenient truth. And that's why we're not hearing very much about it. But they did nothing. And it's a shocking state of play that we're in a country where they don't warrant support by the leader, or the federal leader.
Well, I really think that in many ways we have been led by unserious people for the last 10 years. Yeah. And I think that Canadians have such a naivete when it comes to world politics and world trade like this. I mean, the other countries are hitting it where it hurts. I mean, China knows they hit our canola. It really, beats the crap out of us. They're not playing for little stakes. They're playing for keeps. And Canada's like, oh, well, and we need to get serious. And this is why I brought up the whole thing that if Canada ever did feel that it was going to play for keeps and shut off the oil to the United States, that's where you end up in national unity crisis. We got to wrap up here pretty soon, Bronwyn. Is there any closing thoughts you had?
No, just great, as you said, to get Andrew on today when the federal Conservatives are announcing the energy policy. Pierre Poilievre out this morning, and so great timing, and I think he felt it was also a good opportunity to get a little bit of detail out there too. So
folks, this will be available to watch here. You can, if you didn't catch the beginning, you can rewind it here. It'll be available on Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. I will have them posted for tomorrow on other platforms like YouTube. We try to go about every 2 weeks. We've been lining up different guests. We're not sure the order yet, but as Bronwyn mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Ring of Fire, which is a major project in Northern Ontario that can't seem to ever get off the ground. That's one of the things. I've been talking to John Jeffrey from Saturn Oil and Gas, which is one of the leading producers in Saskatchewan. We're going to get him on one of these days. So roughly every 2 weeks, pay attention to us here. And thank you very much for taking part. And that shall be it. Have a good day, folks.